While you may not have heard the story of Carmen before, you've definitely heard the music. Set against the backdrop of Spain in the early 1800s, the culture of the Roma people, or gypsies as they're still known in English, is just as interesting to us today as it was to 19th century Europeans. So pour yourself some manzanilla and let's jump into the world of Carmen. Today, on Scores Unstitched. So then what is the story of Carmen? Well, the basic outline is that it's about a Spanish soldier's affair with a Roma woman, the general term for the nomadic group of people living in Spain. Although when they arrived and where they came from are still pretty heated topics of debate, but it's generally agreed that they arrived sometime in the early 1400s. And a quick side note here, a lot of Spaniards, wrongly assuming they had come from Egypt because of their darker skin color, referred to them as Egiptanos, or Gitanos in slang. So we did the same in English with our abbreviation of Gypsy, or from Egypt. So today we're going to be using the terms Roma or Romani, which are the names that they use for themselves. So it's not actually really known where they came from, but wherever it was, they were certainly never really welcome in Spain. For about the first 300 years there, Romanis had to live through all kinds of persecution, from being arrested and imprisoned for their ethnicity, to having their homes and villages destroyed, to being forced to marry outside their culture with the exact intention of thinning their bloodlines. By the mid-1700s, the Spanish government was actually so against the Romani being in Spain that King Ferdinand VI led this all-encompassing gypsy roundup to force them from the Spanish land once and for all. Thankfully, the public wound up really speaking out against, well, the disruption to society anyways. So after 16 years, Ferdinand was forced to stop to preserve the peace. But not before the understandably angry and resentful Romani people had lost thousands of their family and friends, been forced outside the cities and outside regular work into these gentrified shanty towns, and ultimately gotten a bit of a reputation for being criminals among the Spanish population. But by now, it's the early 1800s, and because of its taboo label, the Roma culture has, of course, become this endless source of fascination for Europeans in general, not just the Spanish. They were considered these exotic, seductive, bohemian, artistic, and passionate and seemingly lawless men and women. And as a result, they inspired loads of art and literature and, yes, music, like Bizet's Carmen. So Carmen is a sexy bohemian drama set around 1820, both in Seville and the Roma neighborhoods around the city. The plot revolves around two main characters. Of course, we have Carmen, the heroine and the namesake of the opera. She's a Roma woman who's found work at a cigarette factory in Seville, but her, let's call it hella sassy personality tends to get her in trouble, both with women, who generally hate her, and men, who generally love her. In fact, the opera opens with her getting in trouble, pulling a knife on one of the other women that she works with. She's detained by an army lieutenant called Zuniga, and he's always been hot on her, but he kind of shoots himself in the foot a little bit by handing her over to one of his corporals, Don Jose. He's just an innocent, naive young man from a small village with really high morals. All he wants is to be honorable, and he's betrothed to his high school sweetheart, Micaela, Don Jose. And Carmen, man-eater that she is, sees this innocent little flower and seduces him in 5 seconds flat. And he winds up letting her go. Then he's arrested for dereliction of duty and carted off to prison, while Carmen skips back off to her neighborhood outside Seville, laughing all the way. He winds up being in prison for 2 months, and Carmen keeps entertaining other men in the meantime, of course, including a famous bullfighter, or Toreador, named Escamillo. He's also super into Carmen, like, take a number, dude. But he's smart and he's willing to play that long game. Plot twist though, Carmen kinda can't forget about Don Jose, and when he's released after those 2 months, he comes looking for her, and she realizes she's kind of fallen for him, and so she tries to convince him to desert the army and come live with her. Convince him. I think you know. I think you know. They're interrupted mid-convincing though by Zuniga, Jose's boss, remember, looking for his own convincing. Jose, apparently having had some personality-changing stuff go down in prison, gets super jealous and attacks him. Now he's attacked a superior officer, and since that's generally discouraged in the army, he has no choice but to run, effectively forcing him to desert his job, his honor, and his identity for Carmen. Jealousy and sacrifice of morals. is a choice at the beginning of a relationship. But this is where we'll stop, and I'll let the performers take over when you go to see the show. So now that we're familiar with the opening plot and our setting, let's take a look at all the other stuff to know when you go to see Carmen. Carmen, the opera, was composed by Bizet, with a libretto written by Meilhac and Halévy, with Meilhac focusing on the dialogue and Halévy the arias, or verses. Though admittedly Bizet did do quite a bit of editing, or more like straight up changing their work while he was composing. Bizet and his librettists adapted Carmen the novella by Prosper Mérimée, who had been inspired to write it during a trip to Spain. But all of them being French, the opera was written well, in French. Now, it was originally set to premiere in 1873, but it ultimately wound up getting delayed a year and a half because the director was too scared to put it on the stage, saying it was too risque, too immoral, and too tragic. He actually wound up leaving the theater entirely rather than put his name on the opera. And it turned out he was right. When it premiered in March of 1875, the audiences and critics hated it. But both Bizet and his Carmen, Célestine Galli-Marié, who it's pretty widely accepted he was getting his own convincing from during the show's run, stood by the opera. So, later that year, Carmen was premiered in Vienna. And wouldn't you know it, the Austrians loved it. From there it went to Brussels, then London, then New York, then St. Petersburg, but it was actually most successful in Germany, where the Chancellor attended 27 times, and even Friedrich Nietzsche is quoted as having said, "I became a better man when Bizet spoke to me." To this day, it's had over 1,000 performances at the Met alone, and it's the second most performed opera in the world. Now, Carmen is 4 acts long, and depending on the opera house, you may have anywhere from 1 to 3 intermissions. The first act is a little under an hour, the second is about 45 minutes, the third is around 40 minutes, and the final act is the shortest at about 25 minutes. So eat a good dinner and give yourself the full evening to enjoy both the music and some drinks, because odds are good you're going to be at the theater for around 4 hours. Carmen also has a few interesting things going on musically. Like a lot of operas from the Opéra comique tradition, it was originally written with spoken dialogue. Now, if you've seen the video about essential words to know in opera, you'll remember that one of the defining features of opera is recitative, or sung dialogue. So why was it spoken in Carmen? Well, outside opera houses, there were these vaudeville productions of stories told with dialogue and songs that were set to popular music. Over time, composers started writing their own melodies to go with the vaudeville productions, which then kind of snowballed into actual honest-to-God operas that were then dressed up and taken back to the opera house. Eventually, the phrase opéra comique just came to mean operas with spoken dialogue that were performed at the Opéra Comique Opera House in Paris, which is exactly how Carmen, an opéra comique tragedy, came to be. So when it moved to the rest of Europe after its premiere, Bizet's friend, Ernest Guiraud, replaced all the spoken dialogue with recitative, or sung dialogue, to make it more appealing for Viennese audiences who were used to everything being sung in an opera. There's pretty wide debate over which is the true version, actually, as in, what did Bizet wind up wanting in the end? So, place your bets before you go. It's pretty 50-50 whether your production is going to choose spoken or sung dialogue. Now, as for the rest of the music, let's just indulge ourselves with the most popular arias from Carmen first, shall we? Now, not too far into the first act, we get Carmen's first and most well-known aria, the Habanera. Sounds like this. L'amour was un rebelle que nul ne peut apprivoiser. Et c'est bien en vain qu'on l'appelle, si lui convient de refuser. Rien. And everyone knows how it goes, right? Then not too far into the second act, over much wine, we get what's probably the most popular aria from opera, I would guess. I think everybody knows it. It's called the Toreador, or the fight song that Escamillo sings, and it sounds like this. I obviously can't play it. And then besides those arias, there's this strangely minor musical theme to be on the lookout for during the opera. It first pops up during the overture, actually, and then you're going to hear it over and over across every act, usually when something important is happening. It sounds like this. lastly, there are a couple of other arias and duets to pay attention for. So these are the other 3 pieces you need to know. We've already looked at Habanera, so let's jump to the aria turned duet, Près des ramparts de Seville, by the ramparts of Seville. In this aria, Carmen is actively seducing Don José to escape from her arrest, while he tries to convince himself not to be persuaded by her. This is the first real flex you're going to hear from Don José, and it's just a really yummy combination of tenor and mezzo singing, absolutely gorge. Then in Act 2, after the Toreador song that's guaranteed to be stuck in your head for a week after seeing the show, Don José really shows his stuff in La fleur que tu m'avais jetée, or The Flower You Threw at Me, colloquially known as the flower song from Carmen. Carmen's accused him of not being serious about her, and as proof of his love, he pulls out this flower that she threw at him when they first met that he had held on to the whole time he was in prison. The aria is beautiful and heartbreaking, and it's a great rest in the fast-paced music that comes before it, and honestly, how on earth Carmen doesn't believe him by the end is completely beyond me, but then again, I'm a walking Disney princess. Then finally, we get Micaela's aria in Act 3. Je dis que rien ne m'épouvante. I say that nothing frightens me. Yes! Just when you thought the high school sweetheart might never make an appearance to claim her man, and she uses that old chestnut of telling Don José that his mother is dying, and as her dying wish, she only wants to see her only son get married to a good woman. Now, whether it's a lie or not, we never actually find out, but Micaela's manipulation of Don José with Carmen standing right there is like chef's kiss petty. And by the way, I've dropped links to all of my personal favorite recordings of these themes and arias below, so you can check those out down there in the description box. And that's it! A sexy, sing-along tragedy inspired by the pre-flamenco music and traditions of the 19th century Spanish Romani people. If you've seen Carmen before, let me know what you thought in the comments. This is one of my personal faves. I mean, if there's a company in a 50-mile vicinity of my house doing Carmen, I'm gonna go see it. Don't forget to give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time on Scores Unstitched.